And now we are going to move on to the last presentation of this session. And that is by Dr. Sara Rich from Coastal Carolina University, former colleague of mine.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sara Rich. I'm so happy to have this opportunity to present my current research project with you all at this wonderful symposium to celebrate World Wood Day. So I am an assistant professor of honors at Coastal Carolina University in Conway, South Carolina, and I'm presenting today on a brand new project called Fire, Water, Wood, the Lowcountry Dendrochronology Project. So I'm going to be talking about the entanglements of forestry and maritimity in the South Carolina Lowcountry. So to get us started, I would like to just kind of introduce you a little bit to the place, because the location for this project is incredibly important. And as it is, of course, with all dendrochronology projects. So where I'm located is in the U.S. Deep South on the Atlantic seaboard. So you can see the little blue dot there on the map. If you close in to the inset there, you can see that South Carolina is populated by numerous rivers, because we are on the eastern half of the Appalachian watershed. So the Appalachian Mountains in the upcountry and in North Carolina, on the eastern half of the Continental Divide, all those rivers drain down here. So the low country of South Carolina is generally defined as sort of the southern part of the southeastern part of the state, but in a lot of definitions, it also includes like the entire coastal and swamplands of the state. So I'm using low country a little bit liberally here to define basically the top part of the state, the northern part of the state, which is where I live in Horry County, and going down all the way to the Charleston area in the southern part. We hope to, of course, be able to expand this project to include the entirety of the state's low country, which would reach all the way down to the Savannah area, which is where South Carolina borders with Georgia. So this part of the state is characterized by cypress swamps, very ancient, beautiful cypress swamps with very slow flowing black water rivers. The reason the water is black is because of the tannins that the cypress leaves shed and fall into the river, and those tannins turn the water almost like a tea color, like a really dark tea color, which gives it the name black water. We also have, of course, being on the Atlantic seaboard, beautiful sand beaches that are sort of punctuated with really spectacular maritime forests, which I'll show you in just a moment. And we also have some remnant longleaf pine forest in this area as well. So for those of you who don't know, the entirety of the Southeast was covered in longleaf pine woods at the time of European settlers. So for the last up until about 500 years ago, longleaf pines dominated this part of the country. Upon the arrival of settlers and the colonialism that comes along with that, the longleaf pines, up to about 97% of them were deforested, were cut down in order to make plantations, to allow room for agricultural growth, for urban areas, and so forth. Those woods were used in various construction projects, but especially they were used for shipbuilding, which is something that I'll talk about momentarily. So 3% remaining of longleaf pines is, of course, not very much. And so we're very lucky to have in this part of South Carolina some of those remnant forests. So this is the kind of spectacular beauty that we are talking about here. This is one such remnant longleaf pine forest in the Lewis Ocean Bay Heritage Preserve. It is located here in the northeastern part of the state in Horry County. And this particular nature preserve features prominently in the research that I'm going to be talking about today. So here you can see it on one very lovely, foggy fall morning last year. I also have to sort of explain too that the longleaf pine forests are fire-dependent ecosystems, which means that you can see that this is not a very thick forest. There's not a thick canopy of longleaf pines here. And that is because the longleaf pines require regular, systematic, controlled burning in order to outcompete other faster growing pines, such as loblollies and slash pines, pond pines, but especially the loblollies. And so when all these longleaf forests were cut down over the course of the last several hundred years, they were replaced by faster growing loblolly pines, and the controlled burning stopped. This is something that had been carried out by Native Americans living here for millennia, and for, as long as memories can last. And again, that practice stopped. And so with the combined efforts of no controlled burning, to eliminate competing species, and of course, just rampant deforestation, we don't have much left of this particular type of woodland. So in this image, you see cypress swamps. So this is actually part of a canal that leads into the Waccamaw River. The Waccamaw River is considered black water. And you can see just, from this kind of from a kayak perspective, just the incredible age of these cypress trees. We also have a lot of water tupelo in this part of the swamps, as well as numerous other species. So home to tons of endangered species, not just trees, but also all of the animals that live in and on them. This area is also notorious for live oak trees that are draped in this, very romantic Spanish moss. So this is an example down by Monk's Corner. This is in Berkeley County, also on the coast. This is the Cooper River runs by here. This is actually an abbey, and the Cooper River will also feature prominently in this research. So this is another one of those characteristic types of forests that we have here in this area. Some live oaks also live in the maritime forest, so right up at the beach. So this is an example of what's called an octopus tree. So this is a live oak that had been blown down in a hurricane, and then instead of dying, actually the trunk was submerged under the substrate, under the soil, and branches actually grew up from that submerged trunk. And so it gives it kind of this cephalopod look, which is really pretty fascinating. And they are also just, breathtakingly beautiful. So here you see the Atlantic and the wetland area leading up to the Atlantic in the background, behind this live oak tree in the maritime forest at Huntington Beach State Park. So here's another such, lovely shot of our coastal area here. This is in Murrells Inlet, again in Horry County. So, again, just, breathtakingly beautiful, kind of primordial forest, just really, it's one of the only places I've ever done underwater archaeological research where I've been diving with both sharks and alligators. So it is really an amazing place. But of course, with all of this incredible beauty comes, people, more and more people. And you can start to see this already in this image in the upper left-hand corner. You can see the skyline of Myrtle Beach. And so Myrtle Beach is, this just kind of gives you a very small hint of the kinds of threats that our forested areas and our waterways are facing here. And so you can maybe not be so surprised to know that Myrtle Beach is actually experiencing the third largest metropolitan growth rate in the entire country. In the entire United States, the Myrtle Beach area is experiencing the third largest growth rate. I felt like that bared repeating because it's just so phenomenal, and it's just sort of came out of nowhere. And so not only do we not have the infrastructure to support this kind of growth, we also, of course, have the growth comes at this cost of again threatening those few remnant longleaf pine forests, and as well as all of our other forested areas and the health of our waterways. And these two things are of course entangled. So here you see in this image, high rises and, big hotels and things like that. You even see a crane in the background showing how fast these things are going up. But really one of the bigger challenges and threats to the health of our ecosystem here in the Lowcountry is not just the high rises on the beach, but also the housing developments that are being built in the swamps. Namely, the other sort of infrastructural aspects that higher residential rates require, such as hospitals. And so right now we're currently facing a challenge with the Conway Medical Center is trying to build a hospital across from a nature reserve. And that's the Lewis Ocean Bay Heritage Preserve that, again, is home to some of those wonderful remnant longleaf pine forests, which, as I mentioned before, it is a fire-dependent ecosystem. So if a hospital goes up across the street from the extremity of this nature preserve, then the controlled burning that has to take place at that nature preserve will be halted by law, because you cannot have a hospital surrounded by smoke, multiple times every year. And so this is a major issue that I'm really hoping that this project will help to be able to address. And if not in time for this current issue, then there are certainly others that will be popping up here in just given the political context and the socio-political context of this area. So with that in mind, I'll move on to away from the context and toward the aims of this research project. So I and my research team, we are trying to establish a longleaf pine chronology for this area, for the South Carolina Lowcountry. We have two primary aims for this project, and I'll talk about the subsidiary aims later on. But the two primary aims are to be able to date archaeological material from shipwrecks and historic buildings, and to gather data on the relationship between longleaf pine deforestation and construction projects, especially in the maritime sector. So this one is really sort of closely aligned with my past research project initiatives with the Forestry Discovery Project, and also with my my dissertation project at Cornell and at KU Leuven. So the other primary aim of this, and this is something that is somewhat new for me, but that I think is incredibly promising, a very promising avenue of research, is related more to forest and fire history. And so part of this project that I am very passionate about will involve mapping the occurrences of controlled and uncontrolled fires, and then trying to date those fire regimes back to pre-colonial times in order to establish a record of Native American ecological stewardship, again, through prescribed fire. We know that Indigenous peoples in this area practice prescribed fire. We know this through historical documentation as well as oral histories from the Native peoples themselves. But what we don't know is how often they burned, how intense those fires were, where they concentrated the fires, and of course, how effective they were at preventing catastrophic fires. And of course, I don't need to tell you all that now in the Anthropocene, we have greater risks of catastrophic wildfires all over, not just in California and in the desert areas, but also here in this comparatively wet, saturated climate of the swamps too. And in fact, it was only a few years ago that there was one such catastrophic wildfire that burned through this area, and just caused billions of dollars of damage and devastated our forested areas as well. And the longleaf pines are much more resilient to fires than other pines are. And so again, it's this is one of the questions that we have, is exactly how resilient they are, and to what extent controlled burning will even show up in the annual growth rings of longleaf pines in comparison to other pines. So we have some subsidiary project aims as well, including elucidating the historical timber trade. So there is a little village called Bucksport that was very prominent in the 1800s, where it was basically a logging area, again cutting down longleaf pines and then replanting with loblolly pines. And this, it was also a marina. So they also sort of built ships there at Bucksport and also shipped timber down to Georgetown. This is an area close by in just downriver, down the Waccamaw River, which is more on the coast, directly on the coast of the Atlantic. So Bucksport was a huge sort of nexus for shipbuilding and for just supplying ship timbers. And those timbers in many cases would go down the river to Georgetown and then be shipped up to New England, especially to Maine, where the wood was used in the construction of whaling vessels. And so it would be very interesting to be able to use this chronology to be able to trace archaeological samples from whaling vessels that went all over the world, back to their local origins. Another aim of this project is to be able to establish better methods for distinguishing between the endemic southern pine species, which includes, of course, longleaf and loblolly, but again, also slash pine and pond pine. And so right now, it doesn't look like wood anatomy is very promising, but there may be DNA, other anatomical features, again, which would aid in the identification of wood for archaeological purposes. And in some cases, this could actually help with dating as well. So the other project that I'm also very interested in is a sort of marine biological perspective on this, which would record and evaluate the subaquatic biological growth on submerged archaeological sites to gauge the role of these sites in fostering underwater ecosystems. So this doesn't have anything directly to do with dendrochronology, but it is part of the sort of shipbuilding aspect of this project that considers the role of the ship in the ecosystem now, as opposed to before when it was under construction or when it was sailing. So our research methodology has developed over time, and this project has really only been going on for less than 1 year. In fact, I just now gotten my first funding for this project. So everything that we've done so far has been on a volunteer basis, which is amazing, and just goes to show you how passionate some of the local people are about, finding data that might be able to actually combat some of this rampant urban and suburban development in this area. So what we've done so far, we have several sample locations. The underwater sampling has been primarily concentrated in the Cooper River, which again is down in sort of the Charleston, Moncks Corner area of Berkeley County and Charleston County. We've concentrated on the Dean Hall steam vessel so far, which is an early 19th century steamship that wrecked probably during the Civil War. And if it can be tied to a historical record that seems to indicate this exact wreck site. And so the sample there at the very bottom on the far left, you can see a fire scar there in that particular sample from this shipwreck. So this is, again, very promising. And I'm very excited to get back down there to the bottom of the Cooper River and look at some more of these submerged heritage sites there in that river. So far we have 6 samples from pine frames from that shipwreck, and again, there were more on the way. I also have 2 cross sections and a couple of core samples from living trees on the university campus and in the surrounding area. We have sampled pretty intensively at Lewis Ocean Bay Heritage Preserve. Again, this is where a lot of remnant longleaf pines are, and also the site of that potential hospital across the street. We have 1 partial cross-section, which you see there on the bottom right, as well as 90 core samples representing 44 different trees. So that's very exciting. And then our other sample location is on Sandy Island, which is near Bucksport, near that area where there was intensive logging as well as intensive shipbuilding. It's also a site where there was quite a lot of turpentine extraction. So, and this again was very much tied to the maritime sector in the 1700s and 1800s, up until pretty much the end of the turpentine industry in the early 1900s here. So from Sandy Island, we have 16 core samples representing, I believe, eight trees. We also have 4 entire stumps and 1 cross section. And I have to explain briefly about the stumps. You can see in the image it's fourth from the left or second from the right, that shows a stump that has this sort of triangular groove cut out from it. And that is a tree that had been tapped for turpentine. So we're taking stumps that have that marker and then cutting them at the very base of the stump and then making multiple cross sections out of that stump in order to see exactly how the fire scars relate to each other. And this is a method that has been established by Monica Rothers and her research team at the University of North Carolina in Wilmington. So this looks very promising. Some of these stumps, I easily counted several hundred rings just with the naked eye, up to 500 or even 600 rings on these stumps. And we know that they stopped growing new rings at least 100 years ago. So these will hopefully get us back to pre-colonial times, again, demonstrating the involvement of Native American people in controlled burning in these areas prior to European colonization. So next steps, I know I'm running out of time here. I've got some pilot funding from the university and I'm looking for more, of course. We've got to sand and measure the samples that we have and start cross-dating. I will be doing additional sampling at historical sites on land and submerged. And again, of course, keep on fighting the hospital being built in a fire-dependent ecosystem, which you can see here. So these are images of the pines, the longleaf pines at Lewis Ocean Bay Heritage Preserve directly following controlled burning that just took place last week. So in conclusion, I just want to thank you all so much for your attention. Please feel free to send any questions to srich2@coastal.edu. And I also want to give a big shout out to my research team, Drew Reddy, Steve Howard, Trapper Fowler, Craig Sasser, Sarah Jeffords, Caleb Brantley, Catherine Watts, and of course, my quadruped research team of Kima and Nanook, who you see there at the bottom with their backpacks at the bottom of a big longleaf pine, and Bagheera the cat, who just lounges around and gets in the way mostly, but he's a good morale. Thank you again so much and enjoy the rest of the conference.
All right. Thank you, Sara Rich.